Okay, I have to say here, with November fast approaching, we have to talk voting. And the reality is voting a privilege, a right, or a duty? Now, I say, in fact, it is all three. But let's look at the first one here. Privilege. What really is a privilege? Well, a privilege, it's a special right or advantage. So what we have this privilege, this right of voting. We have the advantage of voting, which is choosing your lawmakers, your judges, local sheriffs. Voting is very important. It's something you need to partake in. Okay. And second, let's look at whether voting is an actual right. I mean, what is a right by definition? Okay, a right by definition is a power or privilege held by the general public as the result of a constitution, a statute, a regulation, or a judicial precedent, or any other type of law. Now, voting is also by definition a right. So far we have voting. It is your privilege to vote. It is your right to vote. Is it your duty to vote? Because we do lack voter turnout. No matter what anybody says, it's not enough. Anything under 85, 90% is lacking in involvement in the process. So let's take a look here. If it's a duty, what is the definition of a duty? It is a moral or legal obligation and a responsibility. Well, it is our responsibility to choose our people, to choose our lawmakers, to choose judges, prosecutors, and all those others. So it is a duty. So voting is a privilege. It is a right, and it is a duty. And it is one that we do not exercise enough. We do not come out and vote the way we should. When you look at the last federal elections, they have like 65% voter turnout, maybe a little higher. And that's not much. And then when you have a president that is elected with even 50 or 55% of the vote, even if they get the popular vote, but only 65% voted, and half of them decided who is president. That means one third of the voting population of those people legally allowed and maybe even registered to vote did not participate. That means only one third of people are taking their duty, that right, and the privilege seriously. And if you don't exercise it, it will eventually go away. They've already twisted it in many ways. They keep changing how it's done. They know, you don't even have to prove who you are in some places. They sit there when you get into these voter ID laws. Okay. I mean, what is wrong with having to prove who you are in order to cast a ballot? Something that is your duty and your right, but it is also very important to keep the integrity of the system. You have to be able to prove who that individual was. And they say, oh no, they just come and they can say who they are and they can cast, but then they can go to the next precinct and they can do the same thing. And that'd be what, 2 votes for the same person by one person? And that in itself would be voter fraud on that individual. And passing a law that would allow such a thing, as far as I'm concerned, is legalizing voter fraud. So you do need to prove who you are to vote if you want to keep the real integrity in the system. If you want a system that no longer has any integrity, can't be trusted, and your actual real votes don't count, then you allow a willy-nilly system that allows incompletely filled mail-in ballots to count, non-ID, registration to count, like to just be able to walk in and say who you are and cast a ballot without proving that you live there and you have the duty and the obligation and the right and the privilege to be in that spot and cast that ballot to vote for that person. No. You need to take it seriously, and you need to push to get more people out to vote. I mean, when you think about the fact that 65% on average is about what votes, that means if somebody else came along and could unite that other 35%, essentially, that would create a completely new, true third party that unites the 35% that don't vote, which would turn everything on its head because that would give them enough for victory. So everybody must exercise their vote. I'm a believer that there should be laws that you must cast your vote. If you are not willing to cast your ballot into the system and vote in the system, you almost shouldn't have a right to be using that system and engaging that system and invoking that said system if you are not going to partake in the creation and the continued operation and maintenance of that system by simply casting a vote. I know people are going to be like, oh, you're crazy, you're nuts, you can't do that, or it's racist to demand ID. I don't know where that ever came from. I've never met anybody that didn't have ID unless it had been recently, say, stolen, or they're an idiot and they lost it going out drinking or something like that. But other than that, the only time I never had ID is I got jacked up hard one time and they got my wallet. That's the only time I've ever not had ID, until I started to replace my ID. And it doesn't take long. And getting ID is actually quite easy. It takes no time. So being told that requiring ID to vote is a bad thing is a lie. And being told that it is only a privilege to vote, that you can exercise or not exercise, is a lie. Voting, it is a privilege. It is a right, and it is your duty. See, you cannot turn around and say, no, I'm going to pass. I don't have anything to say. You must vote. I tell people all the time, you must always vote. Even if you don't know who to vote for, go in and spoil a ballot, but it gets counted in the ballots that didn't count. But sooner or later, if enough people stop, nothing is ever going to be decided the way you want it to anymore. Your vote soon will not matter. If enough people stop turning out to vote, or enough people are willing to sideline laws to allow people to vote without proof of who you are, where you live. Okay, I've gone to cast a ballot before when my ID was gone, and I had to have two other, at that precinct, they made me have two other registered voters in the area with their full ID sign off on a paper stating that I was who I said I was. And I did live at the address I said I lived at, so I could vote there. And then they let me vote. But that was somebody else had to put themselves on the line while exercising their right to vote, fully registered with ID, to allow me to. So who's going to do that for other people if that was who's going to willy-nilly just put themselves on the line for the chance of fraudulent vote? No. So you do need ID. You just can't let anybody vote just because. Especially if you don't even know where they came from, who they are. I mean, look at all the people that have recently come to the country and you don't even know if any of the names they've given are real. Because they arrive here with no identification and no paperwork from the country that they had left. So they just say anything and make up anything. And given the state of some of these countries they come from, it's not like the government can turn around and contact their government and prove who they are. Anyway, I just had to go on about that because I'm passionate about the idea that voting is your duty and it is your right. And yes, it is a privilege, but it is something that if you don't exercise your duty to vote and your right to vote, you will eventually lose the privilege to vote.